Good morning. Good morning. Oh, much better. I am Valinda Scarbro Kennedy, and I have the great pleasure of working with universities across the Midwest. And I'm supposed to work with universities across the Midwest, except on a Thursday morning last week, I leave my house, headed to a university. It's 15 minutes from my house. I go to university, I sit and I work with a professor. I finish in about an hour, and we conclude with her saying, hey, I'm also adjunct at Harvard. Can I use this at Harvard? And I say, yes, you can, and we continue our discussion and wrap up. 5 minutes later, I'm back on the road. I see that I have now gotten 3 new calls on my cell while I was in that 1-hour meeting 15 minutes from my house. I rush into my home office, and I see that my phone is ringing. I answer the phone, and it's not the person I was expecting. Instead, it is the British Vice Consulate in Chicago asking me a question. I should also point out my husband is British. Since it's not the phone call I'm expecting, I asked the British Vice Consul, would she mind me calling her back so I can take my next call that I actually was expecting? And I dialed the number, and now I'm talking to a professor at the Mayo Clinic. So in my job in covering the Midwest, in a short span of time, I have, in a period of 30 minutes, interacted with a Harvard professor with big data challenges. I have been on the phone with the British Vice Consul on big data challenges. And now I'm having a conversation with yet another individual at the Mayo Clinic about big data. So indeed, this goes across a multitude of industries. It goes across geographic boundaries. And I can tell you at this point, I have yet to find an industry today that is not challenged with big data issues. But I will tell you, a multitude of industries have already been solving their problems leveraging big data. One of the great things about big data is most of us get what it is now. I have a 12-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. When we talk about real-time data, they have 2 different views of what real-time means. My son is a competitive swimmer. Did I mention he's 12 years old? His world is measured in hundredths of a second. His universe is measured in hundredths of a second. Mom, your GPS is not very accurate. My GPS is not accurate. I travel all over the world, and I use that device to get where I need to go. What do you mean it's not accurate? It only goes down to the second, Mom. Wow. His point of reference is hundredths of a second. That's the difference between him being on the podium or not on the podium. That's the difference between him being ranked 17th in the nation as the 50-meter breaststroke swimmer and not being ranked in the top 20 in the nation. He took up cross country. I, being his mom, sure, you can do cross country. It's your first year of doing it. We will only have 1 week of overlap because it's your first year. Now, had I spent my time looking at the data, I would have realized I had made a monumental mistake. He is a ranked 50-meter breaststroke swimmer in the United States. What does that mean? Endurance, lung capacity. He is now a statewide ranked cross-country runner. First year he did it. But had I looked at the data more closely, I would have realized before I said, we only have 1 week of overlap between training A and training B, not a problem. Basic calculation, I could have figured out I got a bigger problem than now of 3 weeks of overlap and 1 mom and 1 dad. I give you those examples because it's your point of reference. Here's a couple other points of reference. The great thing about big data is so many industries are already leveraging it. Here's an old data point for you. We've got a medical institution in Ontario that's been leveraging big data with prenatal infants. When you end up an infant who's born prematurely, they're put in a NICU unit. In a NICU unit, usually they have doctors and nurses who are monitoring them for various symptoms to determine if there's infectious indicators that are now showing that that infant might have immediate life-threatening issues. One of the things that happens, though, is with our doctors and nurses, they usually take those readings about every 15 minutes. If you use technology that's available today, you can have 1,000 readings being taken every second. If you take 1,000 readings every second, you're able to improve the ratio of understanding. This infant has infectious symptoms occurring 24 hours in advance of traditional methods. What's 24 hours? The difference between life and death. Did I say that was old news? I did. So how many people here have been to the doctor in the last year? How many people had their doctor use technology in helping with their diagnosis? How many people would like the doctor to use more technology to help with their diagnosis? One of the things that I tend to do is I ask the doctor, what's the probability that I'm going to have a successful outcome by taking the treatment you've given me? So not, here's your prescription, go away, but what's the probability? How many times have you done this with other patients? How many times have you personally done it, not medical stats? How many times has it been successful? What are the alternatives if this doesn't work? Why should we try alternative B before we're doing alternative A? And I am not the exception. More and more people are walking in and wanting to have this level of dialogue, which is good. Because I'd like to show you, I talked about the data baby example being old news. Let's talk about something that's more closer to home.
Next, we're going to turn to a different industry. And I want to talk about the field of healthcare. As you know, the healthcare industry has been getting an awful lot of press lately, but it's also an industry that can really take advantage of big data and analytics, because there's multiple processes within the industry. It's not, hey, let me apply big data and analytics to an industry, but let me apply big data and analytics to the processes that drive the industry. Think about the impact to the practitioners of medicine. Think about the impact that has on the care of individuals, but also think about the impact it has on those that are providing that delivery of care, the services they provide. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have a panel today that represents both sides of that delivery of healthcare. One from a critical care perspective, where we're joined by a customer who represents the largest healthcare system in the state of Georgia. So please welcome founder and director of the Emory Center for Critical Care, Dr. Tim Buckman. And representing the supportive services side, we're joined by a representative of one of the largest public healthcare systems in the nation. I'm delighted to welcome Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, Matt Muhart. Gentlemen.
I'm going to stop it there for two reasons. The first is, imagine insurance industry and healthcare industry getting together talking about how they're leveraging big data. So that when my physician says, I want to try this new clinical trial with Valinda, and he puts it in the system, the healthcare provider says, I approve. It doesn't go through years or even months of evaluation, because the data is there to support the physician's recommendation. Speaking of not going through years and months, we are quite all familiar with the Ebola outbreak, correct? My daughter's like, Mom, don't shake hands with anybody, okay? So we are all familiar with the Ebola outbreak, but were you familiar with the fact that about 4 to 6 weeks ago, Emory University students developed a test that can be used to identify a person who has the Ebola disease? How many people were aware of that? By the way, I should mention Emory University students were freshmen who identified this test, developed this test, making it available for immediate use on a problem we are all experiencing today. So I'm showing you examples of big data problems that IBM's already worked on and solved. As I spend my time with you this morning, my goal is to give you access to the tools to work on big data problems. How many people in here are students? How many people are faculty? How many people are neither? So we got a pretty even mix. The great thing about what I'm going to talk about is these resources are available at no charge. So if you're a student, if you're my 12-year-old son's student, we're going to talk about things like the World Community Grid, which means while you're sitting here right now, and if you choose to listen to me and your system's running idle, those resources can be used to work on big world problems. And I mean, we like to work on big world problems, issues that really take a lot of thought leadership, research, and investment to solve. The other thing that we like to do is how do we get everybody involved in solving these problems? The World Community Grid is a tool that's used to get everybody engaged in working on big world problems. So I talked about Ebola. I also live in the suburbs of Chicago. We have what's called their West Nile virus problem. We have various issues that affect us on a regular basis, and so the great thing about the World Community Grid, when we have a virus that pops up in the world, and we have scientists that start working on it, research can be put in the World Community Grid for people to allocate their unused cycles to work on that particular problem. So instead of talking about the West Nile virus being an issue, how about we put the cycles of my machine to work on that? How about computing for clean water? So I see a few bottles of water sitting around the tables here today. What if you could work on water sustainability, computing for clean water, working on a cure for childhood cancer, working on a way to help work on multiple sclerosis issues, coming up with a cure for Alzheimer's? Any of those areas interest you? What if it cost you nothing and you could work on that? The World Community Grid is one of those tools that everyone has access to provide their cycles, to pick the type of problem they want their cycles to work on solving, finding a solution. Let's say you want to go a little bit further, like some of the examples here. We've got examples from telco to banking to healthcare. I don't know what's of interest to you, but what if you could take resources like we looked at earlier from Google that works with this big data while it's sitting somewhere? There's software available to you to do that. Let's take it a step further. What's harder than working with big data at rest? I'm giving you a hint. It's in motion. It's a challenge. Not everybody can do it. What if there's software for the person that says, I like a challenge, that was available to you to work on the problem while it was in motion? What type of problems happen while it's in motion? Let's see. How about data from a neonatal unit? How about information about what's going on in retail for the upcoming holiday season where you can identify fraud while it's happening instead of, let's say a month later? What if you're able to look at information going on in financial systems and say, I see somebody's getting access to trading information before everybody else, and I can prove it. This is about how you take the big data and how you impact the world. So these are industry examples across the globe of how big data has already been implemented to solve problems. So I gave you a couple examples, the World Community Grid, using IBM, working with data in motion tools, working with IBM data at rest tools. But somebody in this audience is thinking, why doesn't she give us access to the big dog? We want access to Watson. Who's thinking that? How many people understand what Watson did 4 years ago? So Watson played on Jeopardy. The nice thing about Watson playing on Jeopardy is Watson took a ton of data and was able to communicate because of the access to the ton of data. Watson was able to come back with an answer on Here's what I think your question is. Valinda Kennedy walks into her doctor. I've got a cough, I've got a fever, I've got a stomach ache. He says, you've got the flu. Wow. Why does he say I have the flu? Last 9 patients had the flu that walked in? What if there's some more information available to indicate that Valinda recently traveled out of the country? Should he ask me more questions at that point in time? Absolutely. What if there was a tool that could review all of my medical records through the 3 places I've lived, across the countries that my family exists in? What if all of that was there at his fingertips, and he could see that when I was 3 years old in Charleston, West Virginia, I had pneumonia. So when I get a cough, I tend to get a cold. What if he could combine all that into one system that said, Valinda walks in with the symptoms as described. Please ask her these 3 additional questions. First question, have you been out of the country in the last 2 years? Second question, where did you go when you went out of the country? Third question, how long have you had the fever? 3 basic questions. But it's going to give a totally different response than last night people walked in with the flu, standard flu, but this is my 10th patient. If I have more information, I could probably do a better job at diagnosis. The great thing about this is today, all of the businesses are struggling with this big data challenge. 1 trillion devices will be connected in less than a month, or less than 2 months. When is 1 minute too late? When is 1 minute too late? We talked about reading a newspaper. How many people have seen in the journal in the last week? Investigations by the SEC for trading. I get my information for trades a minute after you get yours. A minute? That's unconscionable. We're talking about nanoseconds. Congress is talking about nanoseconds. That's when a minute is too late. One of the great things about big data is it's got your answer in it, but it's in there somewhere. There's so much data, there's so much exhaust out there that people are becoming overwhelmed. How am I ever possibly being expected to understand everything that's going on so that I can answer, if you're my doctor, Valinda's medical questions? If you're my trader, how come somebody else got this trade information before? If you're my client, how come, Valinda, you didn't bring this to me earlier? By the way, yesterday, 24 hours ago, speaking of clients, I am originally from West Virginia. I have been into a coal mine. I've been into a coal mine that puts 1 mile of mountain on top of you. Yesterday, we had Joy Global Mining do a great presentation at an IBM town hall meeting. The great thing about coal mining today is that it's recognized across the globe as having to be done different, having to be done safer, and having to mine the best product in the best region for the best price. One of the things that was discussed is how do we leverage at the next stage what we're going to do with big data and analytics. I should point out the reason they said at the next stage is because today they already have 8,200 sensors on most of the equipment that goes into a coal mine. 8,200 sensors on the equipment that goes in. The reason you have 8,200 sensors is because if one piece of equipment is down on average for that company, it costs $3,000 per minute. 1 mile down into the earth, if that equipment breaks down, it's going to cost me $3,000 per minute. So do I want to spend hours having somebody go get the equipment, pull it out, repair it, take it back down, and get it back operational? Or would I like to use analytics to do more predictive maintenance on this piece of equipment has now been operating for 10,000 hours and its usual lifespan is 12,000, so let's go ahead and start doing preventive maintenance at this point in time. Too much low-level data. It's been sitting down there, why don't I just leave it down there until it breaks? Because it's $3,000 per minute when it breaks. The great thing about data is it requires the skills of the types of people sitting in this room. You gotta love puzzles. You want to use data. You want to use analytics. You want to use statistics to try to really solve the big problems of today. The nice thing about it is people have been trying to do this now for several years. There's missed opportunities. There's people saying, nobody's doing this. I think we talked on the other page that people are indeed doing this. But here are all the reasons that people aren't leveraging big data as much as we all would like them to. Why do I say we all would like them to? Because I mentioned Ebola. So my first thought was, as I watched the news, why aren't we using IBM tools to work on that? We are. When we run into a problem, usually our first thoughts are, why isn't somebody doing something around big data to help us get to an answer faster? Why isn't somebody leveraging all the information we already have? Because the typical answer is, this is resource intensive. I'll tell you it's not resource intensive, it's the right resource intensive. The right person with the right tools at Emory University came up with the right answer. The great thing about this is the data's out there. How many people in here are looking for a data set? You're looking for a data. What type of data set are you looking for? Any particular type of geospatial data? Faculty or student? Or neither? Data sets around the globe. How many people are looking for Twitter data sets to figure out what people are thinking about your company right now? You okay with what people are saying a lot about your company? Interestingly enough, in the last 2 months, I had a Northwestern University professor who spoke to a company. It was a group of CXOs. They were in a great conversation, and he pointed out on Twitter, this is what's being said right now about your company. And they had a good laugh. Pretty funny. And then I got a phone call from him about 2 weeks ago. He's like, you know that company I mentioned to you that I told them what was going on with Twitter and they got the good laugh? Well, right now they're not laughing. It went from Twitter comments to now an HR public relations nightmare. So now they're going to spend millions of dollars to try to resolve an issue that first was identified with a quick analysis in Twitter. So that probably is not a surprise to you if you've been reading about IBM lately and our alliance and partnership with Twitter. If you can understand what people are saying and thinking early on, then you have an advantage. This is what big data gives you, an advantage. If you can find that nugget early on, you're able to really take advantage of the fact that I can address it, maybe come up with a vaccine solution, idea, or recommendation before it becomes a huge issue, or it costs people lives, or it costs people money. So when you think about the fact that there is so much data available, we have government data.gov that gives you information across the globe. We have cities. New York City has put in place a New York City data portal. We can get most information about the city by going to that site. Chicago has a City of Chicago data portal. Has anybody in here ever had your car towed? Wouldn't it be great if you could go to a website and it said, right now your car is being towed at 71 South Wacker? Because then you wouldn't walk out and go, oh, somebody stole my car. Oh, my car got towed because I didn't look up and see the snow dates have been set up and established and I missed it by 1 day. So when we talk about big data, and I asked the gentleman about data sets, there's so much data that's being made available to us like never before. Everyone, when I say us, I mean every individual. You have access to this data, you have access to resources to work on these problems. So instead of walking into a company and saying, let me give you a prototype of what I can do for you, think about the position it would put you in if you walked in with a prototype of what you could do for them. Using their own data, taking advantage of tools that are out there and saying, here's what I could recommend as a potential next step. We looked at what all those companies are already doing with big data. The data's there. You have access to the data. Students, you have access to the data. Companies, you have access to the data. So when you look at this chart on the left side, the data is indeed there. If you want to take data and figure out, here's what I want to recommend as a direct correlation between the salary of city employees in the city of Chicago and the delivery of the city of Chicago in reducing their deficit, you have access to that data. City of Chicago public employees. All salary information is on the City of Chicago data portal. You can go out there now in about 3 clicks and find out what the salary is for Mayor Rob Emanuel, who was the mayor for the City of Chicago. And not just the mayor, the alderman, the garbage collector, everyone, that data is out there. So instead of saying, I think we have these problems, what if you walked in and say, here's a correlation between salary and performance? Here's a correlation between crime and building permits. The data's there if you want to take the initiative and move it to the next level. Context-aware analytics. Well, I don't really care what the mayor of Chicago makes, but I do care about crime in certain areas. What if I could do a correlation between the number of building permits and the amount of crime and come back and say, we really need to ramp up police coverage, or we really need to ramp up community programs in these areas, because we're not seeing as many building permits come out. So we really understand that there's some of the issues that we need to work on with the community to address crime in that area. Correlations. It's the context. It's taking the initiative because it matters to you. When it matters to you and you have the data, now you have the context if somebody gives you the right tools to go and work on that problem. You can work on the problem because you live in the community. You can work on that problem because you want to sell that community some product or service. Or you can work on that problem because you want to win an electoral campaign. Data. It's what we all have access to. Real-time action. Let's go from talking about I'm going to look backwards and see what happened and take a stance today on I'm looking forward and I'm going to affect what's happening. That's what we're talking about when we talk about big data and why businesses are using it. Top performance. This is what working on data in the right context is meaning to businesses today. Can I respond quickly when I see in Twitter that companies are not pleased with how I'm getting my labor to develop my tablets in a certain geography? Can I go ahead and make sure across my whole organization, IBM is 420,000 people in 170 countries. We have a lot of data. How do we make sure that when Valinda Kenny's in Lincoln, Nebraska, that when her counterpart is speaking to Oxford, they're both delivering the same message on what IBM is going to provide to that university? Big data. We have to make sure the message is consistent, on time, and on purpose for the right purpose. That's the context. It's when people need it. I like when we were going through the Google discussion, it's don't send me ads about buying a car if I've got 2 kids in college. But when I have that daughter who turns from 14 to 15 and starts driving, I'm probably going to start looking at the car ads. How would you know that? Leverage the data. Leverage all that great information that's out there about me. Make sense of big data in the business moment. If you send me ads all the time, I really like this. We were looking at the Google presentation. We all ignore the ads. But if you could point the ad to me when it's going to be relevant for me at that point in time, if I've been on Google and I've been searching for flu clinic locations, it's probably a good time to send me an ad about Theraflu, right? If I've been on Google and I've been searching for information about fast swimsuits, and you know that it's now the season for national swim meets to be taking place for nationwide rankings, probably a good time to send me an ad for a $600 fast swimsuit where typically most rational people would not buy it. Make sense of big data in the business moment. This is how you get your target audience. This is how you really capture the person's attention. And this is not something that's just limited to big business anymore. It's something we expect from pretty much every business we interact with. We talked about your doctor using the data to come up with a better analysis. Most people in the room probably, if you bought a car in the last 10 years, have done something online to figure out information before walking into the dealership. And those who've been real aggressive have not only done something online, you've done everything up to the point and including having the car delivered to you without stepping on the lot. That's a major change in 10 years from what used to happen. You as the consumer, as the customer, you have access to the data if you choose to leverage it. Since we have access to this data, and it's so much data, the challenge is how do we figure out the right problems to work on? Streaming data is really great if that's what your problem needs. The great thing about streaming data is there's so much more instrumentation of technology today. You can leverage the streaming data, whether it's on the mining equipment or whether it's the data coming from your phone. So as we look through all the great opportunities that are out here, I've been talking about working with data while it's streaming by. I've been talking about that Watson technology. But let me tell you how it all comes together, an example I started my discussion with. The baby in the prenatal unit. 1,000 data points per second. The technology behind that is IBM InfoSphere Streams. The software that you can use to work with data while it's in motion is available to you. There's also the foundation in that solution as well as in the IBM Watson solution. So when we talk about the big problems, I could never solve something like that. The person beside you is probably thinking, if I had access to all these tools, I could definitely solve problems like that. And that's hopefully what you get out of today's discussion. There are big world problems. There are people who feel if I had access to the data and the tools, I could solve them. And I present you with this challenge because 3 weeks ago, I was in Las Vegas. There was a great panel discussion. On the panel, there was an individual from the Concordia International High School in Shanghai. And it said high school instructor. We get that. Everybody here is an instructor. It was actually a misprint. It was the high school student who was on the panel talking about analytics and big data. The high school student was talking about how all the STEM stuff people are talking that high school students don't get, they get. They get it, they understand it, it's common knowledge for them. Technology is what they do day in and day out. But from the perspective of solving problems, not coding. So this high school student was educating everyone else, thinking, oh no, STEM's a problem. He said, no, my friends, we get this. Just let us solve problems. So that example of what's already being done today with technology, it's what the current generation expects. Oh, I need something, we'll look it up on Google. Just as we all went to an encyclopedia, my son's like, Mom, I'm going to Grandma's. Yes, we're going to Grandma's Thanksgiving. Did you put her address in the GPS? I've known your grandmother for 49 years. I did not put the address in the GPS. I know how to get home. Mom, put it in the GPS, please. I humor him. It is a 12-hour drive. I put it in the GPS. I did that 3 years ago. Now, every time I drive to my mom's house, I put it in the GPS. Give me 3 reasons why. It analyzes traffic, number 1. Gives me alternate paths, so I don't waste time sitting in construction on my way home in that 12-hour drive. Next reason I put it in the GPS. What was that? Road changes. New roads have been put in place in those 49 years, or in the 24 that I've been making this trip, that have taken 2 hours off that trip. I know how to get home. I now have traffic. I have road changes. What's the third reason I put it in the GPS? Exactly. My son wants to know exactly how further to drive before we get to grandma's. It answers the question, are we there yet? So we talk about data, even though we think we know the answer. Sometimes we think we know the answer. I know how to get to my mom's house. I know how to get to that house. However, I've just gone through 3 exceptional reasons of why having that GPS programmed to go to grandma's house helps make it a better drive for everybody involved. So even when you think you know the answer, big data gives you additional information to be able to leverage in solving a problem or coming up with a better answer than the one you currently have been using. So I like that example because Thanksgiving's coming up. I will put grandma's address into the GPS. I will take 2 hours off the drive. It will answer, Mom, are we there yet? And I will avoid traffic congestion on the way. Simple example. Think of the other problems that we have on this planet that we want to solve. Water desalination. Why don't we do it today? Water desalination. Why don't we do it today? We can do it, right? We can take salt out of salt water. We can. The problem is the ROI does not exist. What if we had tools like this that we could work on it and do better? What about using algae to solve oil slick problems? And by the way, there's already a student who's working on that one and has a successful implementation. And he went from, in my time of doing this particular work, from being a student, he's now a professor at MIT. Big problems, big data, big ideas. We've talked about a lot of great ideas, and as I go through chart after chart after chart, it's all about what companies are doing today. And they need the expertise of individuals in this room, whether you're the faculty member teaching the students, whether you are the student who's got the idea. It's in the cloud. All these great options are being made more accessible across the globe because we have this in the cloud for people to be able to leverage. IBM has a new resource called Bluemix. Program in the cloud, knock out your application. I had a faculty do it over a weekend with me. The old way, ask a question, work on it, find the data, store a lot of data, analyze the data. Did this really work? No, we're in a more continuous process. How do I make sure I learn from what I just found out? And the next step is Watson, which learns for itself, continues to work on the problem, comes back and refines the answer, comes back and refines the answer, comes back and refines the answer. That's what machine learning allows you to do. That's what cognitive computing is about when you look at the Watson technology. I don't need to know the answer, but I need to have a system that can take all this information, do it in milliseconds, come back with an answer, come back and give me additional questions to ask, and really be able to take me to the next level. That seems to be. We talked about major things. How about the fun things? Even in sports, this applies. Even in government, how do I make my city safer? I use the data. I use the data that's out there available to be used by my citizens and by myself. Why do we care? Because it matters in dollars and lives and in our safety. Dollars, lives, and safety. So we talked about 1 trillion connected devices. But the GPS is our most basic example of when you connect that device to the real-time information, how it can affect each and every one of us. Now, if you look at this list, I encourage you to look at it a little differently. And that 12 months from now, that there's another example on the board. It's what you've done with the resources that are available to you. It's what you've done with the data that's available to you. So I have the sheets like I gave the gentleman who said he was looking for data sets. I have sheets down front, but I also encourage you that you can get these anytime from me by following me on Twitter or looking at my blog. That's how the world operates today. So if somebody's like, Valinda, where can I find that data? It's either in my Twitter updates or you can find it in my blog. And as I wrap up, are there any other questions today about how you can leverage big data to have the impact in the world you want to have. Thank you for your time, and I encourage you to solve the next problem that I'm going to see on the news tonight at 6 o'clock. And I know you're going to be looking at, I'm going to use what IBM talked about today to solve that problem, because I know I can do it. Thank you.